You're listening to the HR Happy Hour Network, sponsored by WorkHuman. By some estimates, over 80% of AI projects fail because of bad data. But here's some good news for HR. When AI leverages the rich, authentic data of employee recognition, you get something truly unique. Human intelligence from WorkHuman, creators of the world's #1 recognition platform. Human intelligence unlocks insights into performance and skills, culture and engagement, and helps surface feel-good stories that illustrate the best of your company culture. To learn more about human intelligence, go to workhuman.com. That's workhuman.com. Welcome to the At Work in America show. My name's Steve Boese. I'm with Trish Steed. Trish, what is happening?
I am here in Illinois today, so it's wonderful to be back. How are you?
I am great. Yeah, it's a hot summer day. It's been an awfully hot summer, but that's awesome. And yeah, I'm excited for today's show. I like it, Trish, when we kind of do our own thing and, skip the guests once in a while, get back to
Right?
our roots, do a little Workplace Movie Hall of Fame, which is what we're doing today.
I love it because that's also one of the most requested shows we do is people always want to hear what movie are we going to review. Sometimes they're old movies, sometimes they're not so old. So excited for today's episode.
Yeah, we are. So, for Workplace Movie Hall of Fame, for folks who are maybe newer to the podcast, we've been doing this occasional series for years. I don't know how long, where we take a movie, usually a fairly popular movie or a known movie, we rewatch it, and then we break it down and talk about some of the work and workplace themes in the movie and try to, just have some fun with it. So, today's movie, Trish, and we've done some movies like, that everybody knows. We've done Big,
Mhm.
we've done Mr. Mom, we've done a lot. I think we did
Right.
Flashdance. What I remember in
We
back in the
did.
day.
We
Um,
did.
but today's movie was maybe a little lesser known. It's called Still Alice. It came out in
Mhm.
2014. Um, and it's a movie that's about a woman who is a professional, a professor, who gets diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, and we follow her journey navigating the disease, its progression, which is not great for her, her
Right.
family dynamics, her workplace dynamics, and so many great issues here. For a little background on the movie, I'd never seen it before, just watching it though, before
Oh,
in
okay.
prep for this show. Came out in 2014,
Okay.
starring Julianne Moore, Alec Baldwin, and Kristen Stewart. Notably, Trish, it was a fairly low budget movie, filmed in 23 days, which I learned today,
Interesting.
for about $5 million budget, and worldwide gross was about $45 million. So
Okay.
did really well for a very heavily themed, heavy themes,
Mhm.
not a superhero movie, none of that,
Right.
right?
It's
So,
no
and it's
blockbuster.
definitely a serious movie, but did really well. And then finally, Trish, Julianne Moore, who's the star of the movie and is
Mhm.
phenomenal in the movie, won like every acting award that year.
Oh,
She
for
won
sure.
the Oscars for Best Actress. She won the Golden Globe. She won the Critics' Choice Award, and on, which almost never happens. And so that's some background on the movie. And so maybe I'll throw it over to you, Trish. What do you know about this movie? Had you seen it before? And let's get into Still Alice a little bit.
Yeah, no, first, thank you for giving all the backstory. There are a few things, little nuggets in there I didn't know. You said it's 2014, so I'm thinking I watched it when I was in my early 40s. This seemed like something so off in the future that I was sort of surprised by a lot of it because her character is in her 50s, I think, or like maybe 50. I think
Yeah, like
she's
maybe
50,
just about 50. Yeah.
just 50. And so at the time, my grandmother was alive who was struggling with Alzheimer's herself. So that's what drew me to the movie. And you mentioned it was up for all these awards. And that was actually probably a year or so before you and I started doing our Oscar preview show. So you wouldn't have seen it at that point. But it was almost hard to watch at times when you know someone who's going through it, even though my grandmother was older. Um, Watching someone's deterioration is difficult. And I thought she did a really good job of portraying someone who's struggling, not just with losing your memory, but being someone who's a highly educated professor, as you mentioned. It's just hard to think about, your life as you know it is slipping away. It's not like a stroke, maybe, where it's all of a sudden and you don't have that time
Right.
to watch yourself deteriorate. So yeah, I'm really glad we're doing this. I think too, as we've seen with many guests we've had on previously, as you're aging and you're maybe now taking care of aging parents, but you're starting to have health issues, right? Whatever those might be, it's a challenge. And so I was also looking at it differently this time through, as being in my 50s and thinking like, wow, she had a lot going on in addition to her own health challenges. So, yeah. What did you think?
Yeah.
Did you like it? Did you?
I did. I did like the movie. It was, I'm a big fan of doing those Oscars shows that we do every year. So we do watch
Right.
a lot of really good movies. And I'd certainly call this a good movie. It was very serious and sometimes hard to watch, right? So she's a 50-year-old, very healthy, very active, and very accomplished. The character is a linguistics professor, right? So
Right.
her whole world is words and language and communication. And some of the early uh, manifestations of the Alzheimer's, what turns out to be early Alzheimer's, is she starts forgetting words. She starts losing her ability to sort of grasp a word to kind of express her thought, right? And
Yeah.
I hate to say it, sometimes that happens to me too. And if it happens too often, I start to worry a little bit like, why can't I think of that word? I used to always be able to think of the word I want. But it's
Right.
particularly poignant for her with, language and her career. And she's so accomplished in the movie, the character. And she starts to lose that. And it's a huge
Mhm.
element of her personal identity, her personal, maybe her worth as a person. And I'd love to maybe get into sort of one of the workplace themes, I think, which is your career as your identity and your
Yes.
perceived value to the world. I'd love for you to maybe, tell me about that, and because I think
Yeah.
this character felt like, her inability to function at a high level in her job, was maybe the worst thing that was happening to her.
Right. Yeah, you're right on that. I think too, when you're in a position like hers where you are highly visible at work, it wasn't like she was doing a job somewhere off by herself, maybe not with a bigger team, but she was on stage every day for her students. And so
Yeah.
I found it really both interesting and sad and understandable that she also didn't come and tell her boss right away, right? She didn't tell the dean of the school or something like that, that she was having these issues with memory loss. So her performance started to appear to go down, right? She was getting complaints, the students were noticing, her boss ultimately has to speak with her about it. And so it just made me think about, wow, there are people in the workplace right now, whether it's early onset Alzheimer's or some other health issue. And 10 years ago, for sure, I don't think you'd come to the workplace and share that. And I do feel like, from a workplace perspective, I'm hoping we've moved the needle a little bit so that people would feel safer at work. I don't know. I mean, do you feel like we've made improvements enough to where people could come and tell their boss or colleagues that they're struggling? You know,
Yeah. uh, Probably not enough. I think it depends certainly on the circumstance and the relationship you might have with the organization, your tenure,
right.
and maybe the nature of the problem you're fighting through. Because the character, even as she starts to exhibit more um, symptoms, right, of
Yes.
early Alzheimer's and starts to slip, she knows in this disease, you're aware of what's happening to you as it's happening.
Yes.
And she would have had to have known that this progression of this disease was going to make her unable to perform at work, basically unable for her to work at all. And she
Right.
had to have known that. So when you know that, right, you're going to be even more reluctant to come up to your boss or your management or even just some colleagues at work to say, hey, I'm having this type of an issue and I'm struggling, when you know that there's no coming back from that issue, right? At least in that
Yes.
role. Like it's not like she was maybe being treated for some other type of a disease, which if you could kind of overcome, you could, or even while you're going through the treatment, you could still perform in that role, maybe with some accommodations or something. So that I
Right.
think is a big difference as well. If you know that whatever you're going through mentally or physically is going to preclude your ability to even work at that role, then
Mhm.
you're more likely to try to keep it to yourself as long as possible.
She
And
did,
and
but then
again,
it just masks what again, people were thinking she was a poor performer all of a sudden.
yeah,
And I thought, wow, like her boss wasn't asking her either, though, like, what's going on? And you see that happen all throughout workplaces now, where someone is just all of a sudden not performing the way you're used to them performing. But yet, we as leaders don't always go to them and say, hey, how are you? Are you okay? Do you need any help? Right. So it was kind of
yeah.
sad on both ends. They were both
Yeah,
in the dark
it
at the time.
speaks to the fact that we don't see this in the movie. We really only see her coming in, basically getting called into her dean's office to answer for some of the student evaluations, which were increasingly getting harsh and poor upon her as a
Right.
professor. When he addresses it with her, it's clear that, at least by implication in the movie, that they were not having regular and ongoing conversations, kind of manager to employee and regular check-ins and
Right.
on a regular cadence, where this kind of thing would have started to reveal itself, even if she hadn't admitted it, right? Um,
Sure.
and we see that a lot too when you have an employee who's been in the organization for a while, who's always been a good performer,
Hmm.
right? Managers tend to go look at the other folks maybe who need more coaching or have more problems, or
True.
often our better performers get the least amount of coaching and support, right? Because we feel like they don't
Mhm.
need it.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it was definitely a classic representation of what a lot of people experience in their career, right? I do have a question for you though. So you mentioned that, sometimes, and we're both in our 50s, right? So sometimes you say you can't find the right word. And I think too, there was an element of she was in denial before she actually had the diagnosis,
Mhm.
because part of being in your 50s-ish, right? You can talk to anyone. You start to forget words, or like I'll go to say an actual word where I think I'm like in my mind it's the right word and it comes out as something completely different. And I'll be like,
Mm.
why did I call that, right? And if you talk to your doctors, typically just your regular medical practitioners, they're like, oh yeah, it's just brain fog from being in your 50s, hormone changes. So I wonder too, especially with this particular disease that she has, was she almost thinking it was like no big deal? It was something else. It was just normal, right?
Yeah,
So,
probably. I mean, at
yeah,
50 years old, you might suspect a number of different problems
agreed.
before you jump to and in fact a rare form of early Alzheimer's, according to the movie,
Right.
right? It was not
Yeah,
just it was very unusual diagnosis, but
it was.
so yeah, so we see her really beginning to unravel as her disease
Mhm.
worsens, and then her life becomes much more challenging on a number of fronts. Certainly, her challenges in being able to effectively perform at her job, which really quickly ends, right? Someone who's a
Oh,
professor of
sure.
linguistics, really a professor of anything, your early onset Alzheimer's is going to basically take you out of the workforce, really, no matter what your job is, right? So and it was such a huge portion of her life and her identity. She immediately begins to struggle, right, with
Mhm.
that loss, right? So it's not just the loss of memory and the loss of function and the loss of her cognitive abilities. It's a big part of her value to her, as a person. And I do think in America, I'll say this, I'll editorialize for a second. We do tend to put so much of our evaluation in our assessment of people and their perceived value, even our own perceived value of ourselves, on what we do. What's our job?
Mhm.
How successful are we at it? And I tend to think that's kind of sad, but I think it's the truth in for a lot of folks.
Yeah, I think the movie is a good reminder to realize too, everything can change in a mere moment. It could change really quickly when it comes to a person's health, whether that's mental health or physical health, right? So, um, yeah, and not only did she lose her identity, because her children in the movie are grown, right? You
Yeah.
mentioned Chris. Kristen Stewart, she was probably the youngest. I don't know if they tell us how old she is, but
She was
late
the
teens, early
youngest
20s.
sibling in the movie. Yeah.
Right.
Probably
And so,
around 21, 22, if I had to
yeah.
guess.
And so all of a sudden, she probably had gone through that empty nest phase a little bit, right? Because the kids are out of the house. And so you almost dive more into work when that happens, when your kids move
Yeah.
out, right? So even more so than if this had happened at 45, probably. Um, yeah, it
Well,
took
I
away.
would say and also your mid 40s to your mid maybe 60, right? For
Yeah,
many folks,
right.
especially in professional jobs, that's kind of your corporate apex, right? That's when
Oh,
you've
yeah.
achieved the highest positions, probably earning the most money, the most prestige, maybe still kind of climbing. And we see this, right? The second half of this movie, from sort of why we wanted to do it for Workplace Movie Hall of Fame, um, is not, beyond her role and her identity as an employee and as a worker in her career, is the impact on those around her from both a caregiving perspective and
Mhm.
also for the husband specifically, his career. And it's actually a huge part of the second half of this movie, the dynamic, what's happening around caregiving, and then what's happening with this husband, who comes off pretty unsympathetic for most of the movie,
Right.
um, around his career. And let's maybe talk a little bit about that aspect of
Sure.
this story.
Yeah, I think you're right. It really explores all sides of this, right? And so, yes, you're still seeing her deteriorate and she knows it. You mentioned like how scary that would be when you know it. My grandma actually, I remember the specific conversation where she said, "I'm losing my mind and I know it." And
Wow.
I was just like, like, what do you say? So as a caregiver, you don't even know what to say because you don't usually, whatever happens, again, someone can have a heart attack, a stroke, or whatever you're helping them go through. You're not a doctor. You don't know what to tell them. And so she was looking for some amount of reassurance from her family. And they didn't know what she was going through either. So I think there's that element of, gosh, if no one knows, it's hard on everybody, right? I don't know. I mean, what stood out for you from a caregiving perspective?
Yeah, a couple of things. Certainly, one being so the character is married, as you said, an empty nester,
Mhm.
two older children, who one of whom is already married, one is, I think, maybe getting married, and then a kind of a third sibling who's younger and on her own as well. I think, and then a husband who's a professor too, I believe, and also navigating his issues, including being recruited. They're in New York City in the movie, this family, and he's being recruited by the Mayo Clinic to go move to Minnesota. I think it's in
Right.
Minnesota, right?
Yes.
For a prestigious job and an opportunity, which he really wants. This character wants to
Yeah.
go take that job, and he wants to drag his poor Alzheimer's suffering wife along with him away from New York City. But that's kind of a subplot in the movie. But what we're seeing here is the stress that having to provide care for anyone really, but certainly for someone who you didn't expect to have to provide care for, just disrupts your own life and the other lives of the family members, because the husband was trying to climb his ladder in his career,
Sure.
right? The older kids have their own lives already going, right? They have one had a child already, I believe, and the other one was about to get married, right? And so they had their own lives. They were not in position to drop everything they were doing to become caregivers
Right.
to their mother, who's only 50 years old. And then finally, the only person in that family with sort of the space in her life to provide care was the youngest daughter, who's kind of trying to
Mhm.
find her way as an aspiring actor in California, who they drag back to New York, basically say, well, you don't really have a job, a
Yeah.
real job, right? So you can take care of your mom, right? And so just the stress, all of that places on the family, it's profound. And I think in our workplaces, certainly we've talked a lot about caregiving the last couple of years, but until you're in it, until you see it, and this movie does a great job of really showing that to you, right? Showing what it could be like having to provide care in this fashion to a family member. You don't understand. And I think organizations don't understand how difficult it can be for employees to continue to work and function at a high level while being faced with those kinds of caregiving responsibilities in their personal lives. It's unbelievable how difficult it is.
Yeah. And it continues to get more difficult because the aging population is extremely large. And because of medical advancements across the board, people are living longer. Or even if you have some sort of catastrophic health issue, you're often able to be saved, right? Or given medication or something. So it's, yeah, I don't think we've ever seen caregiving to this degree. And again, I'm glad you mentioned the stress side of it because there is a lot of unknown and everybody gets stressed out when we don't know what's coming next or how to do things or what the best decision or path is, right? And it's a lot of opinion when it comes to medicine. I think the other thing when you mentioned her children is, with something like early onset Alzheimer's, it is hereditary.
Hmm.
So then they had to decide as her children, are we going to get tested to see if we have the gene?
Yeah.
And I won't give away. So if someone, I don't want to say if they do or don't, but let's just say that going through the stress of having to decide whether you want to know if you're going to be in that same position in the next 20 to 30 years is stressful. You mentioned having children because then do they decide to have a child because of it, right? So
Right.
it's very difficult. And again, a lot of illnesses are like that, right? Heart issues can be hereditary. Certainly other things can be very common to members of a family. So yeah, it's just like layer upon layer. If you ever want a movie that's like an onion to dissect, it's this one, I think. Um,
Sure.
but it's
Yeah.
also instructional. Did you find it was sort of instructional? Because to me, I was sort of looking at it like even if they don't have that exact condition, it sort of helped me think through methodically how a family can go through, um, their own career decisions and whether or not we do care for our loved ones, right, who need us. So a lot of people would walk away from that. They
Well,
really
right.
would.
It did place caregiving that type of a caregiving challenge, and really any type of caregiving challenge, I suppose, forces people to make choices and often sacrifices. Right. So we see in the movie as cognitively she's declining
Mhm.
and needs more care, needs more full time care. They get to a point where they really don't want to leave her alone in the
Oh, sure.
home at all
Right.
for any length of time. So they have
Right.
to bring in a caregiver outside of the family. And meanwhile, he doesn't really make a speech, but you can sense like the husband character thinking to himself. So let's say he's around 50 as well, right?
Yeah.
Thinking, boy, I've got 20, maybe 25 more years of this career I've got, right? And
Yeah.
I got to think about that. And I've got goals, hopes for that too. And
Mhm.
the quandary that you get placed into, right? And he does, like I said, he comes off pretty unsympathetic for most of the movie, and he sort of comes around a little bit towards the end. But the I've never been in that situation where I had to like literally make decisions around, putting my own goals, career aspirations, et cetera, on the back burner, right, for to provide
Right.
care. But it's a very real thing, and I think the caregiving issue is, as I think about it more and we talk about it more, we write about it more, and we've had a number of guests on the podcast talking about caregiving in the last couple of years. It's just so much more complicated than
Mhm.
I would have even guessed. Right? There's
Yeah.
so many elements to it.
Yeah, it is. And we're talking a lot about the employee, the impact on her as the employee or her husband as an employee. It's also the coworkers because when you're going through something, and we know we've had this happen, right? I think we've said my dad had a heart attack. And so like you're my coworker. You have to deal with my stress. You have to deal with maybe picking up hours, right? When I'm having to do something to care for someone. So I think there's that element too. It doesn't just impact that one employee, it's a ripple effect. This is like far reaching, right? It can cause your coworkers to have to work more hours or pick up projects that they weren't working on before. And now all of a sudden they're trying to make it work that way. So yeah, it's just I don't know. It's more impactful than I ever realized, maybe when we
Yeah.
started talking about this 6 or so years ago. So, yeah.
Yeah,
But
and
I do view it as helpful seeing examples of this in media, I think.
Yeah, it's an underrated story, and like I said, this was a smaller movie. It's now it's over 10 years old. Lower budget movie, smaller movie. It did have some acclaim due to Julianne Moore winning basically
Right.
every acting award that year, but it did kind of disappear a little bit under the radar. It's available; you can rent it. It was Amazon Prime kind of a rental for a couple dollars to find it. It may be in other places too, but that's how I found it. Definitely worth a viewing if you are someone who is in a caregiving situation or is concerned about it from the employer point of view.
Hmm.
Thinking about the kind of seeing more in a dramatized fashion, certainly, but understanding a little bit more about what employees would be going through in these kind of situations. Now, she's not elder. She's not the character in the
Right.
movie is only 50, but it's very indicative of some of the issues that older folks have, right, with Alzheimer's and other cognitive,
Hmm.
issues, and having to support employees who are providing care is, I think it's going to be a big issue next year. We've kicked around some of our thoughts on our trends report for 2026. I've pitched strongly for elder care specifically, not just caregiving, but elder care
Yes.
to
Care.
be an important issue for next year. And I think we're gonna talk about that a lot more. And it probably can't be talked about enough, at least from my perspective. It's like you said, with the aging population
Hmm.
and um, folks being really stretched. And also, too, like birth rates are declining and have been declining in the US for a longer period of time. So people will have less, or people will have fewer siblings to lean on
Right.
in these situations, right? They
Yeah.
may not have any, right? They might
They don't
be,
have that.
as their parents age. So this is going to be an issue in workplaces for a really long time.
It is, and I'm glad you're circling back to the whole workplace perspective because one thing I was thinking just today um, about another family member is there are things like, HIPAA that you have to be thinking about, right? Making sure that you as a caregiver have access to the information you need about who you're caring for. Well, that's something that, HR is very well versed in. And we could
Yeah.
certainly be a resource to employees and to leaders on just some of the facts you need to understand about privacy and data and how to be helpful. I think also we've talked in years past about different things that employers can do to stand out and be a true differentiator from a workplace culture perspective. And we've talked a lot about helping, young people with student loans or just things that are, helping them figure out how to buy their first home. But the collective, we have always thought about the younger side of employees, right? Of your journey. I think if you really want to differentiate yourself right now, start putting in components of elder care, of unexpected uh, accidents, illnesses, diseases, right? Because I think
Yeah.
that when we think about HR being very strategic, one of the most strategic things I ever did was working on the benefits plans for my company that I was an HR leader for. And I never thought of benefits as strategic until I got to that level. And when
Yeah.
you're thinking about, because it's anonymized, but how many employees are dealing with certain issues or conditions, as well as their family members because they're on your plan. So it's a very interesting thing to think about how you can proactively benefit people's health so that maybe by the time they get to a caregiving situation, it's not as difficult for them and it
Yeah.
does take some pressure off, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
So
and I think part of this is just being aware, right? Being
mhm,
understanding the composition of your workforce, understanding the likely set of challenges that many of them will have. Many of these folks who are dealing with elder care issues, for example, are also may still have children at home, where they may have kids in college, right? And they're
mhm,
not done being a caregiver of their own children or other family members as well. The sandwich generation they talk about all the time, but that's a very real thing, right? For employees who are, again, maybe late 40s into the late 50s, maybe, and maybe a little bit further, having those issues a lot. And again, in many organizations, right, those are the people tasked with the most responsibilities, the most
that's
stressful
right.
jobs, the most high leverage jobs, the most important jobs, if you want to call them that. That's, I
Right.
guess, I suppose arguable, but we could say that. And so facing a lot of pressures themselves. So this is on the surface, when we talked about having this movie as a workplace movie Hall of Fame, I thought, well, really, Alzheimer's, like, I don't get it, but it really makes so much sense to think about this from a self-identity, self-value, identifying the self as your job, right? And then that second part of the story all around the really practical and often just heart-wrenching challenges around caregiving and balancing,
Yeah.
balancing everything you need to balance as an adult, having to wrestle with these challenges. So super poignant, really good movie. And unlike many Oscar type movies, Trish, mercifully short, like 100 minutes long. Like, you can watch this on a weeknight, right? You don't have to devote 3.5 hours of your life to it,
Right.
which is pretty awesome. So yeah, I like the movie. Worth a watch. I recommend it.
I agree. I really liked it. I liked it more the second time through too, though. I think again, when you look at it with that workplace lens, it just really makes so much more sense of how everyone's feeling and where they are in their careers. And I would say too, I think walking away from watching it again, just seeing how her children stepped up, and these are children that are working, right? They have jobs, they're young, and I don't think we give our young people enough credit sometimes at their capacity to handle really tough, challenging things in life. And I thought it did a good job of showing how the children were coping with this themselves. And they became a big help to the father and to the
Mm-hmm.
mother to some degree with her knowledge. But
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, think about, I think we just have to think about our benefits plans and about caregiving very holistically. If you only think about one thing in a silo and something, it's just, if you want to make an impact in your organization, this is an area you can truly make an impact, and start having
Yeah.
conversations, right?
Yeah. And
Start now.
growing in importance, with the demographics
Absolutely.
in the US, and the demographics of the workforce, it's going to be more and more of an issue over the next, 15 years. So, but the time to start
Yeah.
is now.
Yeah.
It's really now. So,
Well, we talk
we'll be
about
talking more
trying
about caregiving in our 2026 trends report
we
coming out
will,
in a couple
yes.
months. So, yeah, stay
Yeah.
tuned.
But we talk all the time about how do we make people feel connected at work? How do we make them stay with us? So even a subject like caregiving, if you just start thinking the impacts that it has on retention, on company culture, on productivity, it hits every single aspect of our career journey.
Yeah.
Caregiving does. So that's why it's an important trend. That's why it's an emerging and evolving trend. And yeah, we're going to have some really cool research coming out about it.
All right, good stuff. I think we'll let it go there, Trish. Still Alice, 2014.
Still Alice.
Julianne Moore, watch her in her Oscar-winning performance.
Yeah.
Watch to get mad at Alec Baldwin at several times during the movie for his insensitivity, which is fun. And yeah, check it out and tell us what you think. So good stuff, Trish. Had a good time talking about this, and yeah, it was fun.
Me too.
Let's
Thanks
think about
everyone
our
for
next
listening.
movie. Yeah, I don't know what we have to pick one.
Yeah, whoever's listening to this or watching this, drop us a line. We'd like to take suggestions. So we
All right. Good stuff.
need a
Good stuff.
different
All
one.
right. This has been the Outwork in America show, sponsored by our friends at WorkHuman. My name's Steve Boese. Thank you, Trish Steed. Thanks everybody for listening. Go to hrhappyhour.net for all the show archives and subscribe, tell a friend, all the things. We'll see you next time, and bye for now.